Hello, everyone. I am. Oh, wasn't supposed to do that. I am in my garden today, which is quite exciting. It's about 30 degrees, and Candy has decided.
Oh my god.
Candy
Hello,
has
everyone.
decided to wrap up in a blanket. Um, uh, Today, I'm going to be going through definitions of abnormality. A big bullet point, this one. There are four definitions that you need to know about, some quite difficult, some quite similar, and you also need to know evaluations for them as well. So essentially, what we mean by definition of abnormality is what actually is abnormality. What's the level? What's the criteria? Is it how rare something is? Is it how bad something is? So really, we are trying to define abnormality. And as you can see, the first slide on here is what we call statistical infrequency. So what you can see in front of you now is what is called a bell curve. Statistical infrequency, if you strip back the name of what it means, it's essentially looking at something that is infrequent. So it says that a behavior is considered abnormal if it is statistically rare, as in it doesn't happen that much. So an important thing to note about this definition is that this definition doesn't actually say, unlike the other three I'm going to talk you through, this one doesn't actually say that abnormality is a bad thing. Right, the other three said abnormality is a bad thing, it's weird, it's inappropriate, it's eccentric, but this one says that abnormality is simply a rare thing. I do live near an airport, so you're probably going to hear some flights going over in a second, which is really annoying. Bella, stop chasing whatever it is. Um, so, this is going to be really annoying. I shouldn't have done this outside, should I? Stupid planes. Anyway, I'm going to try and go for it in the hope that you can actually hear me. So, statistical frequency is about rarity of behavior. I just want to show you these down here. So basically, and again, you need to note this down. This is the mean, just here, this line you can see, my laser pointer just here. That is one standard deviation, that is two standard deviations. Anything that is outside of these two here, as I'm just going through here, anything that is outside of these two standard deviations is considered abnormal. So if for example this is measuring IQ and your IQ is here, you are abnormally intelligent. If your IQ is here, you are abnormally unintelligent, presumably. So statistical frequency, as I say, is about it deems that any behaviors that are statistically rare, they are considered as abnormal. Fine, that's quite easy. And you've got here basically on a normal distribution, if this can be done, anything outside of 95% is considered abnormal. So this top 2.5% here, roughly, this bottom 2.5%, they are considered abnormal. Now, there used to be a student a couple of years ago who wore a bow tie to college every day. You can't plot that on a graph, yet that behavior is statistically rare. You're looking in what? 1 in 5,000 people, 1 in 5,000 teenagers wears a bow tie. I would consider that to be statistically abnormal. Now, as it says here, any person's measurement which falls outside two standard deviations is abnormal, and this is about how rare a behavior is. Now, to do this, we have to be able to measure characteristics and calculate an average. So, really, really important part of this, by the way, is for you to be able, and I definitely write this sentence down, for you to be able to determine if something is statistically rare, you have to have up-to-date characteristics and statistics. Let me give an example. If I were to come off this and say, let's go on to, I've not tried this out, so let's have a see how this goes. Average height of Danish people. Danish people are among the tallest average height here. The average Dane is 5 feet and 8 inches. The average man is, let's go with the average, actually, let's go, actually, that's quite small. Danish women are actually quite small. Now, that is an up-to-date statistic, but if you're looking 100 years ago, I wonder if I can actually do this. I doubt. I doubt I will get a statistic for this that easily. No. How tall was the average person 100 years ago? 5'10". Doesn't help me at all. Um, but the point is, in order to, this is a key AO1. In order for you to be able to actually define whether something is abnormal, you do need up-to-date statistics. The average IQ is between 70 and 130, with the average being bang on 100. So you have 100 just here, 130 here, and 70 here. So this is actually an IQ score. This is actually an IQ score now. Now, here's the problem. Here's the problem with this definition. If you get an IQ of 131, you fall here, and you are abnormal. You are abnormally intelligent. If you get a score of 129 and you're here, you are perfectly normal. You are perfectly normal. Is abnormality really that black and white? Surely there's like a gradation. There's like a graduated amount of, some people are a little bit abnormal. Some people are very abnormal, for example. Some people are very abnormal. So let's look at some strengths of this. Now, before we go into this, a key strength is that this is very objective. This doesn't involve anyone's opinion about you being abnormal. So it doesn't involve a doctor turning up and saying, I think according to my professional medical training, I think you're abnormal. This is factual. If you are literally 131 IQ points, you are actually factually, objectively abnormal. It's no one's opinion. It's based on statistics. So the good thing about this, it allows for objective measurements. That's really, really important, by the way, because the other three I'm going to look for, and this is a proper key point, the other three I'm going to look through, all of them are subjective in their assessment, meaning somebody has to have an opinion that you are abnormal. Right? It's someone's opinion. That opinion can be wrong, and it's offensive to say that as well. It's based on unbiased pieces of data, so it's objective, so it's not subjective. The difference between objectivity and subjectivity, by the way, objectivity is more factual data that is non-opinion based. So like measuring height, for example, that's objective data. Measuring weight, that's objective data. But measuring happiness, that's subjective, because subjective is more sorry, I'm getting distracted by Bella, who's rolling around over there. Bella, what are you doing? There we go. So weird. Anyway, don't really need to look at that one too much, but let's look at some weaknesses. Who decides 2.5%? So what we mean by that is hold on. Alexa, stop playing. Who decides this video is really going downhill, to be honest with you. Who decides 2.5%? Who said it's the top 2.5% and the bottom 2.5%? Somebody had to have decided that somewhere. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe why not do it 3 standard deviations? So you've got the 0.5% at the top is weird, and the 0.5% down the bottom is weird. That's going to make a lot more people normal. And also, I don't really like this point too much, but not all infrequent behaviours are undesirable. I wouldn't use that point personally, because this definition doesn't say that abnormality is undesirable. It just says it's rare. So I wouldn't use that point too much. The other thing here, and this is, honestly, these planes are really doing my frigging head in. The other point I would say here as well is depression is not statistically rare. 10% of people have it chronically, 20% of people have it at some point in their life. So according to this definition, depression is a normal behaviour. Fine. If it's a normal behaviour, though, we are not going to treat it. And therefore, you would not be able to get antidepressants based off of this definition. So then all of a sudden you've got loads of people who are manically depressed and chronically depressed who cannot get treatment. Let me give you an example of a normal behavior that we don't treat. Dyeing your hair. Dyeing your hair is statistically common, and we don't see it as an abnormal behavior. But imagine if all of a sudden we started to see it as a clinical sign of mental illness. If you came in and you've got blue hair, or if you've got, I don't know, you've got, I don't know, pink hair one side and brown hair the other side, and which don't go, by the way. And I would have to say, right, you need to go to the doctor because you need to get treated. We don't treat behaviors we consider to be normal. So one thing you do have to write about here is that there are major health and economic implications if we consider depression to be a normal behavior, because society would basically go downhill quite rapidly. And the other thing that's quite important here is, does it take into account cultural differences? Not necessarily, not really, not as much as other definitions. There is a model pill here, which I'm not going to go through, but you may want to pause this because I haven't done model pills for all of them. So I'm going to move on to the next one here, which in this case is deviation from social norms. This definition is subjective, so it involves opinion of society. So it's an approach that suggests we consider behavior that goes against agreed social norms as abnormal. So, for example, if people don't like tea, we, and I, by the way, think these people are freaks. No offense. Weirdos. Abnormal. If people don't queue, for example, that's a very British thing. We see them as abnormal, right? If people wait outside restaurants and try herd you in like sheep, that doesn't happen in Britain, but it happens in, say, Greece and other European continental countries. We find that as quite weird, right? Because we think, oh, we wouldn't do that in Britain. So this is the fact that you are deviating from what the norms in society. Didn't realise I live near Heathrow. So let's go into a bit more detail here, because you can break this down a little bit more. People who break the norms are seen as abnormal, right? Fine. Another one that I quite like, actually, is it's a social norm to shake someone's hand when you meet them. What happens if they lean forward and try to put their nose against your nose and wiggle them, right? Like that. Now, in Maori culture in New Zealand, that's how people say hello, but we shake hands. So we would consider that person to be abnormal because they're deviating from what our social needs are. So this definition takes into account cultural differences. It says that in Maori culture, it's weird to shake hands. It's weird to shake hands. But in Western culture, particularly British culture, by the way, I wouldn't say Western culture because the French do the whole 2 kisses on each cheek thing, which again is weird to us. But this can be split down a little bit further as well into situational and developmental norms. So situational norms is an acceptable behavior in a situation, like greeting someone, for example, shaking their hand or bowing to them, or, I don't know, putting your hand directly on their head and humming. That might be a hello somewhere, I don't know. But you've also got developmental norms, and this is more to do with age-related behaviors. So, and the classic example here is wearing a nappy. Wearing a nappy when you're 2 years old is relatively normal, but wearing a nappy when you're 34 years old and you don't have any incontinence issues, that is abnormal. That is abnormal. That is not a developmental norm. So the good thing about this is that it does actually take into account both situational and developmental norms. And there is something I do want to go into a little bit here called the symptom pool. Now, you don't actually need to know this, but if you can bring this up, your examiner is you're going to know more about the examiner in this case. So the symptom pool is basically what each culture decides is a symptom for a certain disorder. So let's look at depression, for example. In the Western world, we see depression as low mood, suicide ideation, maybe change in weight. That is the pool of symptoms that in the Western world we think we link to depression, right? But different cultures view depression with different symptoms. And So not, for example, not all disorders are the same across cultures, like depression. For example, in some Asian cultures, depression, distress. When we're distressed about something in the Western world, what do we do? When we're stressed out about something, we socially isolate, social withdrawal. We get anxiety, so we shake. We might hyperventilate and things like that. But in Japan, particularly Japan, it says Asian cultures, but particularly Japan, they have two things that are quite known for emitting distress. Koro is a delusion that your genitals are contracting into your body. Now, if you went to the doctor and said, "Doc, look, I'm really stressed, I'm pretty sure my testicles are going up into my body," distress would be the last thing you would be diagnosed with, right? At least schizophrenia, minimally schizophrenia would be diagnosed with. And Huabiang, I think I get Huabiang quite a bit, but Huabiang is when you're distressed and you're really like under pressure, you have intense fits of sighing, a heavy feeling in your chest followed by sleeplessness. That's really weird. But in Asian culture, that is normal. That is a normal way to show that actually that's how distress can be seen. So the idea of the symptom pool is really linked to social norms. Each society has a different symptom pool, and that explains why abnormality is so different in different cultures. And there's a couple of good examples that I would need you to be able to use here about things that have gone from acceptable to non-acceptable and not acceptable to acceptable. I'm not going to go through these because you can read them, but some in my lifetime, for example, veganism. Veganism was, I would say at the start, veganism was seen as an abnormality in a way, in a way that we maybe see fruitism, which is just, I think I've slagged off fruitism before, but you just eating fallen fruit that has naturally fallen from the tree. I think we see that as quite an abnormal thing now, but in 10, 15 years' time, it may become acceptable. So homosexuality has obviously gone from not acceptable to acceptable, having children out of wedlock, so on and so forth. What is going to be normal in the next 10 to 15 years? What I would say about this, by the way, is this is also a very good thing, that it accepts abnormality can change. A weakness of that is that, and this is a big weakness, by the way, a weakness of that is if abnormality is constantly changing, that does make it difficult for society to know what is abnormal, because you're teaching society. It's difficult enough teaching a group of 24 people the two process model of phobias. Now we've got to teach all of society what is abnormal. That's actually quite difficult to do. Again, I'm not going to go through these too much because this is what's going to take up most of the slides. But good thing about deviation from social norms, it does give us the right to intervene in someone's life. If we can see that they don't like tea, that needs serious medical intervention. That person needs to be, I don't know, institutionalized or something, so we can intervene in that person's life. And in my opinion, rightfully, because tea is life. It does, don't need to go into that too much. It accepts developmental norms, which is quite good. But weaknesses is incredibly subjective. It's incredibly subjective. Who decided that we as a society are supposed to like tea? I mean, it's the right call, don't get me wrong, but who decided this? So it's not like we all went to a meeting and decided that, right, we're all going to just queuing, we're all going to queue, yeah? Queuing's a thing. That's not how it necessarily works. This one says that actually it's change over time is a weakness. I do think change over time is quite a good thing, but where I would elaborate on this, the change over time makes it very difficult for society to know what is abnormal. Some people still think looking at your phone in the car is normal. And the other thing I would also say, I'm not going to go for that third point, but I will go for the last point. There are a lot of weird students, and I say that affectionately, by the way. I like people individualizing themselves. I like people being an individual. But there are a lot of, students who make, what some may consider to be odd fashion choices, or odd hairstyle choice. I know I can't speak much about hair, but when does being eccentric become being abnormal? Eccentricity is just, just people who are a little bit weird, where's the line? With statistical infrequency, there was a clear line, right? But with this, the line is a little bit blurred, which is an obvious weakness. Now, these next two I want to go into are a little bit different. These next two are a little bit different. What they basically have they have checklists. So what I want to go through now is deviation from ideal mental health, something a little bit different. Deviation from ideal mental health is that it gives you a checklist of everything you need. And if you don't have them, the more you don't have on the checklist, the more you are abnormal. So rather than trying to define abnormality, it's trying to define what good mental health is. So this gives us something to aim for here, right? Remember, the more of these you miss, the more abnormal you are. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. I may go through all of these actually. If you have all 6 of these, you have ideal mental health. I'm not going to lie to you. No one watching this has got all 6 of these. Let's start with the first one. Do you have personal growth? Yes. I think most students are becoming better people. I think most people are capable of personal growth. I think most people are trying to make themselves a better person. So, well done, you get a big tick here. Do you have an accurate perception of reality? No. Most students do not have an accurate perception of reality, maybe because they haven't lived in reality for that long, but also a lot of students I speak to are quite delusional. Not being funny, a lot of students are quite delusional. They think their ability is a lot greater than it actually is. The amount of students I have that go, oh, I'm going to apply for Oxford, like, but you've got 3 C's as a particular grade. No, they'll accept me. No, they won't. No, they will. They will. I'll try really hard. No, they won't. And so there is a bit of an issue there. Students are not the most rational of creatures on this world, so you don't really have an accurate perception of reality. You also don't have autonomy. Some of you have better autonomy than others, but none of you have, I would say none of you have full autonomy. You don't live by yourself. You're not entirely self-reliant. You do depend on your parents a little bit. You're not entirely independent. Again, some of you will be more independent than others, but not everyone. Do you have integration? So this is the one that most students can't do. This is basically, do you resist stress well? Males are better at this than females. Males are better at this than females. How can you resist and cope with stress? By combining your well-being with personal growth. Basically, can you resist the stress of every day? Wait till exams next year. Self-attitudes, having self-respect and a good positive attitude, good self-esteem. Are you, by the way, an automatic positive thinker? I'd say 1 in 20 students are. So that's 19 people who are abnormal. And then finally, environmental mastery. This is also known, and this is quite important for those of you who want to do psychology. This is known as self-efficacy. It is one of the most, if not the most important psychological traits you can have. An ability for you to think that you can take on anything in your path, to be completely competent in all areas of your life. No, I would say no student has particularly strong self-efficacy. It will come with time. It will definitely come with time for a lot of you. So the more you have of these, the more abnormal you are. Fine. Strengths and weaknesses, I don't really want to go through in too much detail because I'm a bit worried about how long this video is going to take. It is quite holistic because it does take into account quite a lot of things, quite a lot of factors there. Look, it's not saying that abnormality is boiled down to one thing. So it's taken loads of factors into account. But again, it is quite subjective. When do you become autonomous? When can you actually say, where's the criteria? Show me the criteria for autonomy. And also, as well, this is quite a big thing. Autonomy is not actually regarded that well or highly in collectivist cultures, in Eastern cultures. It's weird if you are independent in Asian cultures because they're so big on family. It's weird if you turn around to your family and say, "Hi, mum. Hi, dad. Um, I'm going to go to the UK to study. Um, so see you later." Right? Because in Asian cultures, family and community is much more highly regarded. Whereas in the Western world, we see autonomy as a good thing, independence as a good thing. You're self-sufficient. You can feed yourself. You can support yourself. In Eastern cultures, that's not necessarily a good thing. Finally, failure to function adequately. I see a lot of students who are failing to function adequately year on year. Failing to function adequately is basically the individual is unable to meet the obligations that society has set before them. They are failing to live an adequate level. They are failing to deal with the minor stresses of life, and they are, you generally you can see this. Generally, you can see this. So, for example, if you're not going to work or not attending college, right? I think it's fair to say that if you've got an attendance, personally, this is my subjective opinion. If you've got an attendance of 75% or less, I would say that you are failing to function adequately, unless you have good reason, unless maybe illness, for example. But if you are demotivated and you're not really dealing with the stresses of college and your attendance is quite low, I would say that a psychologist would probably deem that you are failing to function adequately. Not going to work, problems with maintaining relationships with loved ones, self-harm, not looking after one's health or hygiene. So generally speaking, and this is again quite important, this type of abnormality is observable. You can see it. When I was 19, I went to go to a psychologist to deal with loads of issues that I was dealing with at the time. And afterwards, I requested back my notes, my medical notes, because I wanted to read what he had said about me, because I'm an egotist. The first thing he wrote was everything about me physically. So he said that I had a little bit of stubble, but I wasn't unkempt. He said that my clothes looked in good order, and I appeared to have good personal hygiene. I had a student a few years ago who smelled so bad. The BO that emanated off her was really bad. It honestly, I had to open all the windows and doors because if we didn't, our eyes would just start bleeding. And when I finally zoned in, like sniffing around, and when I finally zoned in on who it was, I had to have a really awkward conversation with her and say, look, I'm not going to say her name, but let's just call her Delilah. Delilah, you, not being funny, but you really smell. Why is that? And the reason why I had to ask her a question is because she may have smelled because she was failing to function adequately. As it turned out, her mum told her that you can shower with cold water and it's just as good as warm water. Honestly. These are the 7 characteristics. Now, if you just name these 7 characteristics, it doesn't mean anything. You'll get no marks for it. So what I would do is I would pick a couple and be able to elaborate them on detail. So, for example, observer discomfort, the behavior is carried out and it makes surrounding people uncomfortable. If someone around you has got, I don't know, horrible teeth, for example, or they smell, that's a sign that, and it's making people uncomfortable, that's a sign that that person is not dealing very well. Just before I finish this, actually, in nursing circles, there is a type of patient called mental dental. Mental dental refers to this idea about people who are mentally unwell having dental surgery. And the reason why it happens so often is because when you are mentally unwell and you stop looking after yourself, your teeth are usually the first thing to go. Your teeth are usually the first thing that you need major medical intervention for. So there is a link between you visibly and physically seeing someone who is unwell, and them actually being mentally unwell. Another one I want you to be able to talk about here is irrationality. So the unwell person, or the abnormal person, actually does things that maybe are unexplainable in a rational way, does things that don't make sense. So they have delusions, for example. A couple of strengths and weaknesses again. What I would argue here, and this is quite a good point, the last two definitions, criticize them. They are almost impossible to reach. They are almost impossible to achieve normality. So is it the case that everybody is abnormal? So there are sort of major issues with this. There are some questions here, and I do want to point out that what AQA have started doing is they've started asking for specific definitions. Beforehand, they would just say, describe and evaluate 2 definitions of abnormality, and students would then only revise 2. But now AQA have cottoned onto that, and now they're asking for specific definitions. So discuss statistical infrequency and deviation from social norms. And if you don't know those 2, you're pretty buggered. That is pretty much it. There are a couple more questions. Out of it. My screencast. Send you to sleep, babe. Yep, so that's it for definitions. It's a big bullet point. It's a huge bullet point, actually. I hope that was useful. You are likely going to get a question on this in the exam.